The grand mansion stood silent, its towering windows reflecting the soft glow of the setting sun. The intricate arches and gilded furniture seemed out of place in the empty house. Once it had been a lively place, filled with laughter, warmth, and the unmistakable scent of freshly baked pies. But now the halls were quiet, too quiet, each step echoing in the emptiness. Grandma Evelyn stood at the threshold of the old, creaking house, her frail fingers resting on the cold brass handle of the door. She hadn't crossed its threshold in months. She still remembered the day she and her late husband, Harold, had moved in, hand, full of dreams and hope. The mansion, a symbol of their success, had become their sanctuary. But now it felt more like a prison. Her hands trembled as she reached for her cane, steadying herself before stepping inside. The wooden floors groaned beneath her weight, and her breath caught in her throat. Each room she passed was filled with shadows of the past. The scent of her husband's cologne still lingered in the air, a faint reminder of the man she had once loved. He was gone now, his absence an ache in her chest that wouldn't go away. It wasn't just his absence that haunted her, though. It was the betrayal. Her eyes moved toward the grand staircase, its marble steps polished to a gleaming shine. The grand chandelier above her seemed to mock her, a symbol of a life she no longer recognized. It was in this very house where her life had changed forever. It was in this house where her heart had been shattered into pieces, all for the sake of greed. She had been forced to sign away the very mansion she had once called home, her sanctuary, forced to relinquish control over her $1 million estate, all under the guise of love, of promises made in the dark of night. Harold had always been charming, always able to talk his way out of anything. But what she hadn't known was that he was slowly draining the life out of her, piece by piece. The lawyers, the documents, the pressure to sign. All of it had been too much for her to handle. She had trusted him with her heart, with her dreams, and with their future. But in the end, he had left her vulnerable, abandoned, and forced to give up the very thing that defined her life. Evelyn's hand gripped the banister as she slowly ascended the stairs. The weight of the years had taken its toll on her. She could feel the ache in her joints, the weariness in her bones. But it was more than that. There was an emptiness inside her, a hollow void where once there had been joy, where once there had been hope. At the top of the stairs, she paused, looking down the long hallway that led to their bedroom. She hadn't been able to bring herself to enter that room since Harold's death. The bed, once shared with the love of her life, now lay undisturbed. The pillows lay untouched, the sheets crisp but cold. But it wasn't just Harold's absence that made it unbearable. It was the memories of the night she had signed the papers, the night she had given away everything she had ever worked for, everything they had built together. Why didn't I see it? She whispered to herself. Why didn't I see what he was doing? Her voice broke, the tears she had held back for so long threatening to spill. She had been blind to the warning signs, blind to the way Harold had slowly manipulated her, leading her to believe that she was doing it all for the good of their family. But in the end, it had been nothing but a lie that had stolen her freedom, her dignity, and her sense of self. Evelyn turned away from the room, unable to bear the sight of it any longer. She shuffled down the hallway, past the paintings on the walls that once brought her joy, but now felt like ghosts of a time long past. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of the years was pressing down on her shoulders. In the living room, she sat down on the couch, her tired eyes taking in the grand, empty space around her. The house felt foreign to her now. It was no longer a home. It was a mausoleum, a place filled with memories that only brought her pain. But there was something she hadn't given up on, something she still held close to her heart. Her lawyer. He had been the one to expose the truth, the one to see through the lies and uncover the betrayal that had been hidden behind the inked signatures of the papers. The lawyer who had promised to help her reclaim what was rightfully hers, to fight for justice. Evelyn closed her eyes, her mind swirling with thoughts of what could have been. But in that moment, she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't done yet. She would fight for her estate, for the mansion, for the life she had lost. The lawyer's call was still fresh in her mind. "We'll get it back, Evelyn. I'll make sure of it." She would get it back, no matter what it took. The early morning sun poured through the large windows of the mansion, casting long, soft shadows on the floor. Evelyn sat at the old wooden desk in the study, staring at the stack of legal documents before her. The papers that once seemed harmless, a formality in Harold's eyes, now seemed like an insurmountable mountain. She had spent the better part of the night going through the documents again. The handwriting on the contract felt like a betrayal in every stroke, Harold's signature looming over hers like a cold shadow. She had been pressured, manipulated even. At the time, she had thought she was doing what was best for their future, trusting him, believing the words of a man she had spent decades loving. But the truth was, she had been blind to the signs. Evelyn slowly picked up the phone, her hand shaking. She had been waiting for this moment, waiting for the right time to call the lawyer who had promised her that she could still fight. As the phone rang, her heart thudded against her chest. "Hello, Miss Evelyn," a calm, steady voice answered. "I've been reviewing the documents you sent. It's worse than I thought." Evelyn's breath hitched. "Worse," she whispered. "How?" "I think your husband was in the process of transferring ownership of the estate to someone else, someone outside the family. And based on what I've seen, this was done without your full understanding or consent." Her chest tightened. It was a cold reality that she had suspected, but never fully acknowledged. All these years, Harold had been controlling more than just the household finances. He had been playing a dangerous game, one that Evelyn had been unaware of. She thought they had been partners in every sense of the word, but now, with the truth coming to light, she realized how much he had kept hidden from her. "Are you saying the house, the estate, is no longer mine?" she asked, her voice faltering. The lawyer hesitated, but only for a moment. "Not yet, Miss Evelyn. But the paperwork indicates that the transfer was only partially complete. There's still a chance we can reverse it." A wave of relief mixed with guilt washed over her. Relief, because there was still hope, and guilt, because she had let it all slip away without realizing how dangerous it was. She had trusted Harold implicitly, but now she could see that trust had been a weapon in his hands. "How do we begin?" Evelyn asked, her voice steady, but the weight of the decision hung over her like a dark cloud. The lawyer's voice was filled with determination. "We'll gather evidence of the fraud. If we can prove that you didn't fully understand what was happening, we can contest the transfer. I'll need to meet with you in person, go through every detail of the agreement." Evelyn nodded, though she knew the road ahead would be long. She would have to relive every painful memory, confront the truth of how she had been manipulated. But she wasn't afraid anymore. "All right," she said, her voice firm. "Let's do it." Later that evening, as Evelyn sat at the dining table alone, she ran her fingers over the smooth surface of the fine china. The plates and silverware were still arranged as they had been when Harold was alive, a reminder of the life they once shared. It seemed strange now, like a time long ago. She could still see him sitting across from her, smiling, making plans for their future. But all of those plans had crumbled, destroyed by his greed and deceit. Evelyn stood up, pushing the chair back with a loud scrape. She couldn't stay in the past anymore. She couldn't dwell on the life that had slipped through her fingers. Her gaze fell to the framed family photos on the mantel. The younger versions of herself and Harold, so happy and full of promise. The images seemed so foreign now, almost as if they were photos of strangers. But there was one face in the photos that still felt like home. Her children. They had grown up in this mansion, surrounded by love and security, unaware of the tension that had started to fester beneath the surface. Evelyn picked up a photo of her daughter, Grace. Grace had always been her rock, the one person Evelyn knew she could turn to. But when Evelyn had needed her the most, Grace had been too busy with her own life to notice the cracks in the foundation of their family. Evelyn hadn't blamed her. Grace had her own family, her own responsibilities. But now, Evelyn needed her more than ever. "Grace," she whispered, her voice trembling. The phone rang again, pulling her from her thoughts. This time it was Grace. Evelyn answered quickly, trying to steady her breath. "Mom," Grace's voice was warm, concerned. "I was thinking about you today. How are you holding up?" Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, but she held them back. "I'm managing, darling. Just trying to get through this day by day." There was a pause, and then Grace spoke again, her voice soft but steady. Mom, I know things have been tough, but you don't have to do this alone. We'll fight for you together. Tears welled up in Evelyn's eyes as the words sank in. For the first time in months, she felt the weight on her shoulders lighten. Grace had never been as involved in the family estate as Evelyn had hoped, but hearing her daughter's voice filled her with a renewed sense of strength. We're going to get through this, Grace said firmly, and we'll do it together. You'll get your life back, Mom. I promise. Evelyn didn't say anything for a moment, but in her heart, she knew that this was the first step. She had her lawyer's support. She had her daughter's love. And most importantly, she had the courage to fight for what was rightfully hers. The mansion wasn't just a house. It was her legacy, her family's history, and she would be damned if anyone, especially Harold, was going to take it from her. The journey to reclaim her mansion and estate had begun. Evelyn's feet, though weak with age, carried her with purpose as she walked into the lawyer's office. The polished wooden floors creaked under her weight, but today, they didn't seem as oppressive. Today, Evelyn had a sense of resolve, a feeling that, for the first time in a long while, she was no longer a passive observer in her own life. Her lawyer, Greg Sanders, was waiting for her, his office filled with thick files and stacks of papers, a disorganized chaos that somehow felt fitting for the task at hand. Miss Evelyn, Greg greeted her warmly, standing to shake her hand. Thank you for coming in today. Evelyn nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere. How bad is it? She asked bluntly, taking a seat. The weight of what she was about to hear pressed on her chest like a boulder. Greg sat down across from her, his face grim. It's complicated. Your husband did a lot of things behind your back. We've been going through the details, and there's more to this than just the estate transfer. Evelyn's stomach tightened. What do you mean? Greg opened one of the thick files on his desk, pulling out several documents and laying them in front of her. He pointed to the first one. This is a deed of sale. Harold signed it, transferring most of your estate into the name of a company. The company isn't even one you've heard of, and it looks like he was planning to funnel assets into it, all under the guise of preserving wealth. Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face as she stared at the papers. The words on the page blurred as tears welled up in her eyes. Why would he do this? She whispered. Greg leaned forward, his voice softer now. It seems like he was preparing for something. Maybe an investment he didn't want you involved in, or maybe he had his own plans. But whatever it was, he didn't want you to know. Evelyn clenched her fists in her lap, her nails digging into her palms. Harold had always been secretive, but she had never suspected that he would go to such lengths to hide things from her. What can we do? She asked, her voice wavering. We need to prove that you didn't fully understand what you were signing, Greg explained. We'll start by looking into your communications with Harold at the time. We also need to find any evidence of coercion or manipulation. If we can prove that you were misled or pressured into signing the transfer documents, we can void them. Evelyn nodded, her resolve hardening. She wasn't going to let him get away with this. Harold's manipulation had stripped her of her dignity, but it wasn't too late to fight back. Later that day, Evelyn sat alone in the grand library of the mansion, the silence settling in around her like an old, unwanted friend. She picked up a photo album from the coffee table, the leather cover worn with age. As she flipped through the pages, memories rushed back. Memories of better times, of laughter and love. But the smile that once filled her face now seemed distant, a shadow of the woman she had once been. Her fingers stopped on a photo of herself and Harold from their younger years, standing in front of their first home. Harold's smile was wide, his arm draped over her shoulder. She could see the love in his eyes, the promise that they would always have each other. At least, that's what she had believed. But now she could only see the lies. Evelyn closed the album with a snap, the sound reverberating in the empty room. She had to stop looking back. She had to focus on the future, on what was in her control now. It was time to face the truth, no matter how painful. The next few days were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and paperwork. Greg's team worked tirelessly to uncover more about Harold's hidden dealings. Each discovery was more shocking than the last. Money siphoned off to offshore accounts, assets transferred without her knowledge, and even forged signatures on documents that were supposed to be for her protection. One afternoon, as Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, reviewing the latest batch of legal documents, Grace arrived unexpectedly. She had been in and out of town, but she had made it a point to check in with her mother. Evelyn was grateful for the visits, but today there was something about Grace's presence that felt different. "How's everything going, Mom?" Grace asked, setting her purse down and sitting across from her. There was a subtle shift in her tone, a protective edge that Evelyn hadn't heard before. Evelyn looked up, her heart heavy. "It's worse than I thought, Grace. He was hiding so much from me. The estate, the investments, everything. I trusted him with my life, and now I'm left picking up the pieces." Grace's expression softened. "Mom, you don't have to do this alone. We're going to fix this, I promise you." Evelyn smiled faintly, grateful for her daughter's support. "I know, darling. I'm just so tired. I'm tired of fighting ghosts from the past and trying to pick up the pieces of a life I thought I had built with him." Grace reached out, taking Evelyn's hand in hers. "We'll fight together, and we'll win. I'll be here every step of the way." The comfort of her daughter's words was a balm to Evelyn's weary heart. It didn't make the pain of betrayal go away, but it reminded her that she wasn't alone in this fight. Later that night, as Evelyn sat on the porch, gazing out at the mansion she had once loved so dearly, a sense of determination washed over her. The mansion may have been taken from her, but her spirit hadn't been broken. This was her home. It had been a symbol of her love, her life, her legacy. No one, not even Harold, could take that from her. Not while she still had the strength to fight. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Every morning, Evelyn would wake before the sun rose, the weight of the battle ahead pressing heavily on her shoulders. She would pour herself a cup of tea, her hands still trembling from the nerves, and sit at the kitchen table with the legal documents spread out before her. There were no shortcuts in this fight. It was tedious, draining, and emotionally taxing. Each new discovery, each piece of evidence that Greg's team uncovered, seemed to deepen the wound Harold had left in her heart. One afternoon, Greg called with an update. Evelyn had come to expect his frequent updates, but this one was different. "Miss Evelyn, I need you to come to the office," Greg said, his voice tense. "We found something that could change everything." Her heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" she asked, though she feared the answer. "It's a series of emails between Harold and someone else," Greg explained. "We found traces of correspondence that indicate he wasn't just transferring assets. He was planning something far more significant, something that might explain why he pushed you into signing those papers." Evelyn's pulse quickened. "Who is he working with?" Greg paused before answering. "That's what we need to investigate. But there's a name that keeps coming up, someone you might know." Evelyn's thoughts raced. Who could it be? Who was Harold hiding behind? "Meet me in an hour," Greg said. "I'll show you what we've found." When Evelyn arrived at Greg's office, the air was thick with anticipation. She had spent the entire drive trying to keep her mind focused. But the more she thought about it, the more the pieces began to fit together in an unsettling way. Greg was waiting for her, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a visible tension. He motioned for her to sit down, then slid a folder across the desk. Inside were printouts of email exchanges. The first few seemed ordinary enough. Talk about investments, properties, and financial arrangements. But as she read further, her stomach churned. The emails revealed a man who had been planning to take everything from her, all while making her believe they were still working together toward a common goal. And there, in the digital thread, was a name she hadn't expected. Peter Carmichael. Evelyn muttered under her breath. Greg looked at her with narrowed eyes. "Do you know him?" "Peter." Evelyn's voice trailed off as memories flooded back. Peter Carmichael was a businessman Harold had introduced her to years ago, someone he claimed was a business partner. But Evelyn hadn't thought much of him. He was always lurking in the background, a figure she had never trusted but hadn't questioned. But now, the truth was becoming clearer. Peter Carmichael had been more than just a partner. He had been the mastermind behind Harold's plan to manipulate her into signing over the estate. Evelyn's hands shook as she turned the pages of the email trail. It was all there. plans to transfer the mansion, investments in foreign accounts, and detailed arrangements to siphon money into Peter's hands. All of it had been done under her nose, while she had believed they were working together. Harold was never the man I thought he was, Evelyn whispered to herself, her heart sinking. He never had any intention of sharing this life with me. Greg looked up, his expression sympathetic but resolute. It's a game of control, Evelyn. And Harold was never playing by the rules. But now we have the evidence we need. We can bring this to court. The drive back to the mansion felt different. The weight in Evelyn's chest had grown heavier. But now it wasn't just the burden of betrayal. It was the clarity of purpose. She had been living in a fog for so long, not wanting to believe the worst of Harold, even after his death. But now, with each new piece of evidence, the fog had begun to lift. As she stepped out of the car and walked up to the front door, Evelyn felt something else stir within her. She had always loved this house, this mansion, but it was no longer just a symbol of her past. It was a battleground, a place where the truth would be revealed, where her strength would be tested, and she was determined to reclaim it. The following days were a blur of legal motions, meetings, and strategy sessions. Evelyn spent hours with Greg and his team, going over every detail of the case. They were building their defense, piecing together the lies and deceit that Harold had woven into their lives. She didn't sleep much. Every waking moment was consumed with the fight ahead. One evening, as she sat in the library once again, Evelyn found herself drawn to the photograph of Harold that sat on the mantelpiece. It was a picture from their early years, taken just after they had moved into the mansion. Harold had always been so full of life back then, so full of dreams for their future. Now, all of that seemed like a distant memory. Evelyn reached up and took the frame from the mantel, her fingers brushing over the glass. She studied his face, young, hopeful, and so sure of their shared future. The man in the photograph wasn't the same man who had deceived her. The man she had loved was gone, replaced by a stranger she had never known. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't allow herself to cry. Not yet. Not when there was still so much to do. Her hand shook as she set the photograph back down on the shelf. The mansion had once been their dream, now it was her fight. As Evelyn turned to walk away, a sense of finality settled in her chest. She was done with the past, done with the lies. It was time to take control of her life again. The morning of the court hearing arrived sooner than Evelyn had expected. For days, she had been in a whirlwind of meetings, strategizing with Greg and his legal team, preparing herself for the challenge that lay ahead. The mansion, once her sanctuary, now felt like a prison. Each time she entered it, she was reminded of the life Harold had stolen from her. Today, however, would be different. Today, Evelyn was no longer a passive victim. She was a woman determined to fight for what was hers, for the life that had been stripped from her without consent. As she walked out of the front door, her hand clutched the strap of her purse with a sense of purpose. Grace had been by her side every step of the way, and now they were both headed to the courthouse. Evelyn could feel the tension in the air, thick with the weight of what was at stake. The house, the estate, her dignity. The drive to the courthouse was silent, the hum of the car's engine the only sound between them. Grace kept glancing at her, her face a mixture of concern and resolve. Evelyn appreciated the quiet strength her daughter exuded. For the first time in a long while, Evelyn didn't feel alone. She had Grace by her side, and that made all the difference. The courtroom was cold, sterile, and intimidating. Evelyn had never imagined herself here, let alone fighting to reclaim a life that had been taken from her. The walls felt like they were closing in as she stepped inside, her eyes scanning the sea of faces. Some were familiar, other lawyers, reporters, and some were strangers, but the one person Evelyn kept her gaze fixed on was Peter Carmichael. He sat across the room, his face impassive, his eyes meeting hers for just a moment before he looked away. The contempt in his gaze was enough to make her stomach turn. He was the man behind Harold's deceit, the one who had orchestrated everything, the one who had taken everything she held dear. Greg leaned in close to Evelyn, his voice low but firm. "We've got this. Stay focused. You know the truth, and we have the evidence." Evelyn nodded, the strength in Greg's words grounding her. She couldn't afford to let fear or anger cloud her judgment. Not today. The judge entered, and everyone rose in unison. As the proceedings began, Evelyn listened intently, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had seen the evidence, heard the damning emails, and uncovered the layers of Harold's betrayal. Now, it was time for the world to see the truth. Greg presented his case with precision, laying out the facts one by one. He spoke of the fraudulent asset transfers, the forged signatures, and the emails that exposed Peter Carmichael's involvement. Every word Greg said was backed by hard evidence, and Evelyn could feel the weight of each revelation land like a blow. But she didn't flinch. Not this time. Then came the cross-examination. Peter's lawyer was relentless, trying to discredit the evidence and paint Evelyn as a woman who was simply too emotional, too eager to cling to the past. They questioned her understanding of the documents she had signed, trying to portray her as naive and uninformed. But Evelyn stood tall, her voice steady and strong as she responded. She wasn't going to let them diminish her anymore. She had lived through the pain, the confusion, and the betrayal. Now, she would show them that she wasn't a victim. She was a woman who had fought for everything she had, and she would fight for what was rightfully hers. Yes, she said, her voice cutting through the courtroom. I trusted my husband, but I also trusted him to be honest with me, to be a partner. I signed those documents not out of ignorance, but out of love. Love that blinded me to the truth. But I'm not blind anymore. Peter's lawyer attempted to push back, but Evelyn's words had already made an impact. She could see the uncertainty in the eyes of the jurors and the judge's furrowed brow. It wasn't enough to simply attack her. They needed to prove that she had knowingly signed away her life, and they couldn't. Not with the evidence they had. The day dragged on, and Evelyn's nerves began to fray. The pressure of the courtroom, the weight of the truth, and the responsibility of reclaiming everything she had lost took its toll. But with each passing minute, she reminded herself of one thing. This fight was hers to win. As the day came to a close, the judge called for a recess. Evelyn walked out of the courtroom with Grace by her side, her shoulders heavy, but her spirit unbroken. Mom, you were amazing in there, Grace said, her voice filled with admiration. Evelyn smiled faintly. I had to be. For myself. For us. That evening, as Evelyn sat in her bedroom, the weight of the day finally settled in. The trial had taken everything out of her emotionally, physically, and mentally. But as she sat at the edge of the bed, staring out at the mansion that had once been her home, a sense of peace began to wash over her. She had done everything she could. She had fought for her future, for her daughter, for the life Harold had stolen from her. And no matter what the verdict would be, Evelyn knew she had reclaimed something that couldn't be taken away. Her dignity. She closed her eyes and allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The fight wasn't over, but she had taken the first steps. And that was enough. The next morning, Evelyn received a call from Greg. The tone in his voice was different, almost triumphant. Evelyn, he said, we won. Evelyn's heart leaped in her chest. What do you mean? We won. We have the court's ruling. The documents are voided. The estate is yours. Peter and the others are being investigated for fraud. A surge of relief and triumph washed over Evelyn. She closed her eyes, allowing the emotions to take over, but only for a moment. It wasn't just a victory over Harold. It was a victory over the lies, over the betrayal, over the pain that had held her captive for so long. And now she was free. The morning after the court's ruling, the mansion felt different. It was as though the walls had exhaled a collective sigh of relief, releasing the weight they had carried for so long. Evelyn stood in the grand hallway, her fingers tracing the familiar curves of the banister. It was the same house she had fought so hard to reclaim, but it now felt like a place of possibility, not imprisonment. The court had sided with her. Her estate, her mansion, and her dignity were hers again. The legal battle had ended, but Evelyn knew the real work was just beginning. She had spent so long focused on fighting for her property that she had neglected to nurture the parts of herself that had withered under Harold's control. Grace had been her anchor through it all, and now With the victory in hand, Evelyn could finally begin to repair the broken pieces of herself. It wasn't just the house she had to reclaim. It was her life, her sense of purpose, and her connection to those she loved. As the days passed, the quiet of the mansion became a space for reflection. Evelyn spent hours walking through the rooms, each one a fragment of a life she had built, one that had been overshadowed by Harold's lies. But now, those rooms were her sanctuary again. She decorated, dusted off old mementos, and opened the windows to let the fresh air in. She was putting the pieces of her world back together, one step at a time. One afternoon, as Evelyn sat on the porch, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the nearby trees, Grace came outside with a cup of tea in hand. Evelyn smiled as her daughter sat beside her. The warmth of the sun on their faces is stark contrast to the coldness they had faced in the courtroom. "I've been thinking," Grace said, sipping her tea. "Now that everything's settled, maybe it's time we make some new memories here. What do you think?" Evelyn looked at her daughter, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I'd like that. I've spent so much time holding on to the past. It's time to look forward." They sat in companionable silence, each lost in their thoughts. Evelyn had always dreamed of a peaceful life with Harold, of watching their children grow up in this house. But the dreams she had once shared with him were no longer hers to hold on to. They had been replaced by new dreams, dreams of freedom, of healing, and of rebuilding what had been torn apart. As the weeks turned into months, Evelyn found herself growing stronger. She began to reconnect with old friends, people she had once shared laughter and life with before Harold's secrets had driven a wedge between them. The friendships that had seemed distant now felt like lifelines. She spent evenings having dinner with friends, sharing stories of her past, and creating new memories. One night, while having dinner with Grace, Evelyn mentioned something she hadn't thought about in years: her love for painting. "I used to love painting," Evelyn said, stirring her soup absent-mindedly. "I haven't picked up a brush in ages. Maybe it's time I start again." Grace's eyes lit up. "That sounds wonderful, Mom. You should do it. You've always had such a talent for it." Evelyn smiled, feeling a spark of excitement for the first time in months. She hadn't realized how much of herself she had given up while trying to keep up with the demands of her marriage. But now, in this quiet, newfound freedom, she could rediscover the parts of herself that had been buried for so long. As autumn rolled in, the mansion came alive again. The colors of the leaves mirrored Evelyn's inner transformation: golden hues of warmth, rich reds of strength, and the quiet calm of a life finally at peace. She spent her mornings painting, her afternoons walking through the gardens, and her evenings cooking meals for herself and Grace. One evening, as they sat together at the dinner table, Evelyn felt a sense of contentment she had never known before. "Mom, you're happy again," Grace remarked, her voice filled with tenderness. Evelyn looked at her daughter, her heart full. "I think I am," she said softly. "It's taken me a while to get here. But I've learned that happiness doesn't come from what you own. It comes from within." Grace smiled, a mixture of relief and pride in her eyes. "I'm so proud of you, Mom. You fought for so much, your freedom, your happiness. I've never seen you this strong." Evelyn's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I couldn't have done it without you, Grace. You've been my strength when I didn't think I had any left." For the first time in a long while, Evelyn felt at peace with herself. The mansion was no longer just a symbol of the past. It was a place where she could truly begin again. The shadows of betrayal and deceit had been replaced by the light of new beginnings. One morning, Evelyn stood in front of the large canvas she had set up in the studio, her brush poised above it. She had spent weeks painting a scene of the mansion, its tall windows bathed in the soft glow of the sun, the gardens alive with color. It was a reflection of her journey, the way she had taken something that had been tainted and turned it into something beautiful again. As she added the final touches, Evelyn stepped back to admire her work. The painting wasn't just a depiction of the mansion, it was a portrait of her own rebirth. She had reclaimed her life, her peace, and her sense of self. And for the first time in years, she was ready to move forward, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Evelyn's story wasn't just about reclaiming a mansion or an estate. It was about reclaiming herself. And as the sun set over the mansion that had once been a prison, she smiled, knowing that she had won, not just in the courtroom, but in the fight for her own freedom. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Evelyn felt ready to face whatever came next. The crispness of the early winter air filled the mansion as Evelyn stepped outside, wrapped in a thick sweater, her hands tucked into the pockets. The grounds were quiet, the trees now bare, their branches stretching toward the sky like outstretched arms reaching for the sun. The mansion, still grand and imposing, seemed to hold its breath, as if awaiting the next chapter in its long history. But Evelyn no longer felt the weight of the past pressing down on her shoulders. With each passing day, she had let go a little more of the man who had once been her husband, the man who had deceived her and stolen so much of her joy. She had spent years tethered to that version of her life. But now, with the victory behind her, Evelyn was beginning to realize that she was free. Truly free. She stood on the edge of the garden, her eyes scanning the horizon, where the sky met the land in a brilliant wash of orange and pink. It was the kind of view that made her believe in second chances. Grace had been her steadfast companion through it all. But Evelyn had made it clear that she wanted more for both of them. "I'm thinking of doing something for myself, Grace," Evelyn said one evening as they sat over dinner, the glow of the fireplace flickering softly in the background. "Something that I've always wanted to do." Grace set down her fork, her eyes full of curiosity. "Like what, Mom?" "I want to start a new project," Evelyn said thoughtfully. "Something that brings people together. Maybe even give back to the community here. Helping others who've gone through struggles like I did, offering them the same support I had when I was in the dark." Grace smiled, proud but also a little surprised. "That sounds incredible, Mom. I think you'll make a real difference." As the weeks went by, Evelyn began to put her plans into motion. She contacted local organizations and met with a group of women who had experienced hardships similar to hers. Together, they brainstormed ideas for a community center, one that would provide support for women who had endured trauma, betrayal, and loss, just as Evelyn had. She poured her heart into it, organizing fundraisers, meetings, and outreach programs. It was as though she had found a new purpose in life, one that wasn't tied to the past, but rather to a future of empowerment and growth. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt a sense of fulfillment, an inner peace she had long forgotten. She had spent so long living in the shadows, always taking a back seat to Harold's plans and desires. But now she was taking the wheel. She was no longer just the woman behind the scenes. She was the woman leading the way, carving out her own path. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Evelyn stood in front of the fireplace, gazing into the dancing flames. Grace had gone out with friends, and the house felt quiet again. But this time, Evelyn didn't mind. The silence was no longer oppressive. It was comforting, like a blanket wrapping around her. Her thoughts wandered to the mansion. She had once thought of it as a symbol of everything she had lost, a constant reminder of the man who had taken so much from her. But now, as she looked at the room she had redecorated, the paintings she had hung on the walls, and the moments she had shared with Grace within these walls, she realized something. The mansion was hers, not because of the legal battle she had won, but because she had reclaimed it. She had taken ownership of it in a way that was deeper than any contract could bind. This house was a reflection of her strength, her resilience, and her capacity to rebuild. And for the first time, it felt like home again. Over the next few months, the community center Evelyn had envisioned began to take shape. It became a place where women who had lost their way could find a path back. The center offered counseling, workshops on financial independence, legal advice, and most importantly, a safe space where they could share their stories without fear of judgment. Evelyn spent a lot of time there, guiding the women and offering her wisdom. She had learned so much from her own experience, about resilience, about standing up for what was rightfully hers, and about never losing hope even when the world seemed stacked against you. And she knew that sharing her journey could help others find their own strength. One day, a woman approached her after one of the workshops, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Evelyn," she said softly, her voice trembling. "You've helped me see that I'm not alone, that I can fight back just like you did." Evelyn smiled warmly, her heart swelling. "You're stronger than you know," she replied. "You just have to believe in yourself." The words felt genuine, coming from a place of true understanding. Evelyn had been that woman once, lost, unsure, and afraid. But now, she stood tall, a beacon of hope for others who were struggling to find their way. One late afternoon, as Evelyn sat in the garden, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Grace came outside, carrying a small package. "For you, Mom," she said, handing it to her. Evelyn took the package, curiosity piqued. Inside, she found a small framed photo, a picture of the two of them standing in front of the mansion, both smiling, arms around each other. The photo was old, but it was a memory of the life they had fought for. "You look happy," Grace said, sitting beside her mother. "I've never seen you like this before." Evelyn glanced at the photo, then back at Grace. "I am happy, Grace, and I'm proud of the woman I've become. It's taken time, but I've finally found my way." Grace took her mother's hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm so proud of you, Mom." Evelyn looked out at the garden, the flowers blooming around them. The mansion, the estate. "It was never about the property," she said softly. "It was always about me finding my voice, finding who I am, without anyone telling me who I should be." Grace smiled, resting her head on Evelyn's shoulder. "You found it, Mom, and you've built something incredible along the way." For the first time, Evelyn felt at peace, not just with her past, but with her future. She was no longer defined by what had been taken from her. She was defined by what she had built, the life she had reclaimed, and the woman she had become. And as the sun set behind the mansion, Evelyn knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning.